we've been talking so much about emotions and how they play a role, but why should we care about how emotions actually affect a person's willingness to adopt an innovative healthcare product? Where do they come in?
When we talk about emotions, in the article that we wrote here, we talk a lot about the emotions of fear and disgust, and those are, a lot of the emotions that first come to mind when you think of why someone may not want to adopt a new treatment. But of course, fear and disgust are just two of emotions that are amongst a set of other basic emotions that humans and animals can have. There's happiness, there's sadness, there's anger. And in general, what we find is that for all of these basic emotions, when people's emotions are high, so if you're extremely high in happiness, high in anger, high in sadness, and of course high in fear, high in disgust, we tend to make poorer decision making under those circumstances. In some realms, this is called being in a very hot state, right? Emotional hot state versus being in a cold, rational state. And when you're in this emotional hot state, we tend to make more impulsive, more harsher judgments that we could come to regret later down the road.
So you're talking about a decision that might not be the most rationally or beneficial, but you're being pulled by anger to do something that you normally wouldn't choose, or by sadness or hunger. I've definitely been in the supermarket and bought a lot more because I was hungry in that moment. So for an innovative product comes in, let's say there's some level of disgust, even if you recognize that there may be a great benefit to that product, the disgust overrides that rational decision.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's, we can't discount the usefulness of fear and disgust. They're absolutely relevant. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, they, ensure our survival. And when we think about, some of the more extreme examples of innovative health, like fecal transplants and psychedelics, and there are other examples, of course, disgust kicks in because those treatments are, in our minds, associated with something else that triggers disgust. But in this case, disgust gets in the way of us making the best choice for ourselves.
Or maybe even wanting to hear about the product, right? There's a lot of evolutionary backing in disgust about both those items, potentially dangerous mushrooms and our own fecal matter, right? It goes way back. So, I could imagine a situation where a person doesn't even want to evaluate the possible benefits because they're so put off by the initial, ritualistic response to those products.
Yeah, exactly. And fear is very much the same. We can associate fear with psychedelics. I mean, psychedelics, when you think of them, 1970s, people getting high.
Definitely got a rap.
It's got a rap. But there's other treatments. Some of the new digital therapeutic treatments that are out there. Here may not be a visceral fear, but it's a fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty. And nevertheless, that gets in the way of us making the best decision for ourselves.
So how can we best help people who are experiencing these kind of emotions to avoid or regulate those emotions so that they can get the best treatment they need?
So to help people overcome their emotions, and we need to emphasize that it's not, sometimes people's emotions are useful. And that it is okay to feel those emotions. But there are, we're talking about the times where maybe the emotions are getting in the way of people making the best decisions for themselves, and they themselves may realize that. And what can we do to help people? With helping people overcome their emotions in the face of having to select a new treatment, there's really two buckets of things that we can think about. The first one is, how can we change people's perceptions? And within that, the question is, do we try to override people's emotions, or do we try to harness it? And this question is interesting because I think everybody's familiar with the Buckley's campaign.
Yeah.
It tastes bad, but it works, and it's a really interesting concept because it doesn't try to tell you to feel something different. It doesn't tell you to ignore what you're feeling, but rather it points out that, yeah, it does taste really bad.
It almost just assumes, yeah, you're going to have this taste, but it's worth it.
But it's worth it. And that's really interesting. So we can ask the question whether we need to override these emotions, or can we harness it in some way?
You know what, that's funny, because I was thinking that I very simplistically think of the strong, fearful emotions as the barrier, but the offer on the other side could also be big or small, right? So if I'm afraid of needles, I might go ahead and accept that pain if the reward is worth it enough. Whereas same needle and the reward is something low, I might not take that action. And so when you talk about overcoming a person's or overriding their emotions, or even shrinking their emotions, like we do with air travel. People are afraid of air travel, so we try to teach them that it's not as frightening, reduce that. So I think in some ways, it's just the fears are the payment for the benefit. And if we can shrink one or grow the other, it can actually change the ratio.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what's, I think you mentioned something interesting. Right there, as I talked about earlier, there's two buckets of things. One bucket is the perception, but then the second bucket, of course, is we can think about how to actually change people's reaction and behavior. There's presumably research, and I think a lot of us immediately jump to thinking about what kind of incentives can we give people to change their behavior. And there's a lot of research on that, and it does work to a certain extent for a limited period of time. But we can think about how to go beyond incentives, because the problem with incentives is that it works in the moment, but once you remove it, people's behavior go right back to where it was before.
Yeah, I think smaller, stable behavior changes that lead towards the desired action can often be a lot easier to kind of get in place. So for example, imagine you wanted somebody to engage with a website about a new medication or know more about it, or et cetera. Well, you might have to figure out a way to incentivize or reward even logging onto the website, or clicking a banner that asks about the medication, or requesting more information. And positive experiences or rewards that people get for taking each closer step to using that product or to learning about the product can help them develop a level of comfort with the product, even if it's innovative or new. Mm-hmm. So trying new ways to have people experiment with your project and try it in safe ways can be a very valuable strategy.
Yeah, and that brings us to our last point, which is, amongst changing people's perception and behavior, there's another thing that we can do, which is to help people feel that they have a sense of familiarity with this new thing, and that's typically called the mere exposure effect. And that's certainly linked to something that's frequently used in clinical psychology to help people overcome fear, which is successive approximation.
Yeah, just being around a thing longer, especially if things seem safe in the place of that, in the surroundings of that place, allows you to adjust to it, become more familiar. And actually, you can almost see, when you neuroimage people's brains, you can almost see their level of liking for the given object as better. So in advertising, we know that constantly having that product in the face of the customer, getting them to know it, having them relate to a friendly icon or a friendly image is very important. That bleeds into their acceptance of other things that product wants to do.
Yeah.